In a previous video, I talked about the science of Olympic bars, more specifically, what is a straight bar, how that is attained. Today I want to talk about the Olympic plates and what constitutes a quality plate, what to look for in the manufacturing process. There are a handful of companies that manufacture a quality plate, and the rest are junk. And that's the fact, because gyms want cheap plates. They want to pay a lot for their equipment, and that, I think, is because, again, we have a proliferation of commercial gyms when the owners aren't actual lifters, professional lifters. They're just guys with money that want to own gyms, and they don't know anything about plates and bars and the other equipment. They have no depth in the industry. But anyway, as far as a cast iron plate is concerned, there's a lot of science that goes into that, a lot of quality control issues. Now, everybody knows what a mold is, and we know what molten iron is, and the molten iron is poured into that mold, of course. But within that mold, you have a layer of sand, and that sand has a certain moisture content to it, okay? And then, of course, then that molten iron is allowed to cool, and then eventually the plate's removed from the mold. Now, the factors that constitute a quality plate are the fineness of the sand, the grains. The finer, the better plate you're going to have. The moisture content of the sand, that has to be tightly controlled. The amount of time the molten iron stays in that mold, the amount of time it's allowed to cool, how long it stays in that mold is a very important issue. The longer it's in there, the better plate you're going to have. And the problem they have with these cheaper plates is these manufacturers are trying to make plates quickly and cheaply, and they don't leave them in the molds long enough. So you get an inferior plate. Now, some of the other issues would be, are they cleaning all of the sand out of the mold between castings? That's another issue that's very important as to creating a quality plate. So there's a lot that goes into making a plate, and there are some other issues as well. The biggest, most important factor for me when purchasing a cast iron non-calibrated plate is weight accuracy. And I can tell you that the quality manufacturers allow a plus or minus 2% variation on their cast iron plates. This means if you have a 45-pound plate, on the low side it can be 44.1 pounds, and on the high side 45.9 pounds. That's considered acceptable with the best of the manufacturers. We have seen with the inferior plates a 45-pound plate that was actually 37.5, and one on the high end that was actually 59 pounds. So you have to study the reputations of these companies before you make a purchase. Now, in my experience, changing gyms throughout my 33-year career, I would run across different brands of plates, and I would always weigh a number of those plates over time and wait to see if I can see a pattern develop. And I have done so, and I can tell you which plates are accurate and which ones aren't. So, again, do the research. It's worth it in the long run. Hole accuracy is another important factor when purchasing Olympic plates. The standard Olympic bar sleeve is 50 millimeters, and the plate holes are considered acceptable if they're anywhere from 50.2 to 50.8 millimeters. That's an acceptable play in that hole, but anything larger than that is not considered a quality plate. And the way to test that is when you slide these inferior plates on the sleeve of a bar, if you can move them like this, if there's that much play in there, that's a junk plate. You don't want to buy that plate. Because think, if you're in a squat and you're trying to control that bar and those plates are moving around, it's going to be very hard to control that bar. It's going to affect your squat. So this is a very important issue for competitive powerlifters and Olympic lifters. Another quality issue with plates is paint. And any of you folks out there that have done any auto body work, you know that paint is a science in and of itself. Now, with regards to these plates, most companies are inferior companies, they use too much paint. And too much paint chips. Okay, so you have to have the right application of the right amount of paint applied to the surface. And you've got to make sure there's no rust on that plate. Otherwise, the paint will flake off. And the way to manage that situation is simply to do a proper, thorough sandblasting of that plate. And then you not only want to paint that plate with whatever type of paint is going to be used on the finish, but you want to have an undercoat of a polyester-based paint. And then maybe your hammer tone on top of that. Okay? Then you've got to let it cool and dry completely before you ship it. All these factors go into a good paint job, and it's if you get a brand new plate and it's already chipping, it's cast iron, it's going to start to rust immediately. There's a lot, as you know now, there's a lot that goes into, and I've only touched on the big stuff, there's a lot that goes into the manufacture of a quality plate, and I just suggest to everybody out there that's going to purchase plates for their home or their gym is to do the research on these companies, pay a little more. It's going to last you your entire life. You won't have problems, and you can hand them down to your grandkids.